And through that, I just got really interested in seeing how to use real estate as just a tool to generate wealth. Well, I think as realtors, our job is to adapt and to adjust to changing markets set up now. Whereas if you have it on a blockchain and everyone can access the same information, you're eliminating so much room for error.
So welcome to Jerome in Real Estate. I'm Jerome, your local realtor here in the Fountain and Colorado Springs area. Today, I have brought on a fellow realtor who is also very much well-versed in blockchain. So I figured I would bring her on and try to have a little bit of discussion. Maybe I'll learn something. Maybe you will too. Her name is Alla Rubinstein, and I don't do intros. So Alla, why don't you go ahead and introduce yourself?
Sure. Well, thanks for having me, Jerome. So you and I actually got connected because you took one of my crypto and real estate courses, which I've found myself doing more and more frequently because so many people are interested in this topic. My background is I've been a realtor, traditional realtor for a number of years, but I am also the head of investor relations at a digital asset investment fund out of Denver. And so I have been fusing my two interests and passions, combining real estate and digital assets to help educate people in the space. For myself, stay informed and kind of at the forefront of these two industries combined. Just a little bit about me. I service buyers and sellers in the Crested Butte market, which is a ski resort community here in Colorado. So I specialize as a resort and second home specialist. And then in addition to sort of wearing the two hats between the crypto fund and real estate, I am also a certified crypto agent with Proppy, as well as a certified blockchain expert with the Blockchain Council. I do have to say one thing sort of before we start this conversation, though, is I have to add my typical disclaimer that this conversation and anything I say today is for educational purposes only. It should not be construed as investment advice. I always recommend that everyone does their own research and consults with a tax, accounting, or a legal advisor if you do have any questions. So,
yep, definitely appreciate that. Yeah, and as far as for me, yeah, I'm not here to educate anyone. So take that. This is all just for me. This is all just trying to provide information that people can, go out and research themselves, just like you said. So I definitely appreciate you coming on. I do want to ask you about, real estate side. How did you get into real estate in the first place?
Yeah, that's a great question. My parents actually have owned several properties that were just investment properties. It's a way that they were able to achieve their retirement goals. So I saw them do that and kind of got interested in the market through them and decided to get licensed so that I could help them transact in some of their properties. And through that, I just got really interested in seeing how to use real estate as just a tool to generate wealth. I think it's something that is a rare opportunity for anyone from any socioeconomic background to get involved and to learn without having to know too much technical financial stuff. So that's kind of what got me into it. And, I thought I would do it sort of for myself and for family. And then I ended up doing so much more. That's kind of blossomed into a new career.
Oh, man, that is awesome. You're like the perfect person for me to chat with. But I'm not going to get too deep into just real estate. Hearing that story, though, about how, you kind of watched your parents live that dream. And now you can not only help them, but you can help others and educate others on generational wealth through real estate. That's what I'm all about. I love it. That's awesome. But now, switching over to the other side of what this conversation is going to be, how'd you get into blockchain, crypto? Like how do those two things even go together?
Yeah, well, I think I probably have a familiar story to a lot of people in the crypto and blockchain industry, is that there is no traditional skill set or sort of straight line path that anyone follows to get into the space because it is so new.
Yeah.
I happened to find myself in it. I was hired by BXC in 2017 when we came together to launch the fund. My background previous to that was actually with international NGOs and nonprofit fundraising. So for me, when I was first learning about blockchain and cryptocurrency, the application wasn't, the fluctuating price of Bitcoin or how do you make a quick buck off of this new money. It was really about the technology itself and how it was applying globally to marginalized communities, to the unbanked, to people who were affected by severe economic markets that we don't experience here, luckily in the US, but many countries around the world do. And we're kind of seeing this play out in real time with the war in Ukraine, for example. They were able to raise over $60 million in aid for Ukraine, whereas, regular people weren't able to access their bank accounts anymore. They were able to leverage crypto for aid. And then you have things like, again, countries that have insane inflation. I mean, Venezuela, Brazil, I think even South Africa has gone through severe inflationary periods. And so I think the folks living in those regions are a lot more likely to embrace digital assets as the future of money because they see how mismanaged their governments and their banks and their traditional institutions have been. So to me, that was sort of like, wow, this makes total sense. There's so much broad application for this besides trading. And when I joined the fund, I just started learning and consuming as much information as I could. And now basically anywhere I look, I'm like, wow, this could be applied, blockchain technology can be applied here and it can be completely transformed or improved or just made better with this new tech.
Yeah, and that is something that I definitely noticed when I got into blockchain, which it hasn't been that long actually. I really only found out about Bitcoin, crypto, blockchain. I want to say, yep, it was the beginning of 2021, so that's when my ears got perked up to it. And I kind of did the same thing you did where I focused on it and researched it for just weeks on end,
And it's
it just
easy to just going. There's so many rabbit holes you can go down.
So much to learn, so much to understand because it's so new too. So you're getting it from both sides. You got the crap and then you've got people that actually know what they're talking about, and you literally have to figure out what's what.
That's so true. There's so much to filter through.
Yeah. Before, I wanted to ask you real quick because you did, you brought up that some of the more marginalized countries on the planet are, they're more open to using this type of technology, especially economically. What do you think about what, El Salvador is doing right now? Because they are basically, they've made it legal tender, there's been a lot of talk about it not going so well right now, but in the very beginning when they did it, it seemed like it was a great bet. But do you have any thoughts on countries actually making it legal tender and where it's going to go?
Yeah, I mean, I think there's, always two sides to the same coin. I think initially it may be, and I can't speak too much to El Salvador specifically. I've read a bit about it, but I am not personally involved in any of that stuff.
Yeah.
So my interpretation of it is that, initially it was a great way to kind of have a parallel currency alongside their fiat currency. And to involve international markets and international business in the economy. It wasn't necessarily for the people themselves per se. It was a great way to balance out, the troubles that they were having internally economically. I think on the one hand, for those who were able to take advantage of it, were able to deal in a much more stable currency than what they were experiencing at home. At the same time, I'm not sure how actively the people themselves were using it. And there is still a level of oversight, even though blockchain is in essence decentralized and there is no central authority that should be controlling it. There are different types of blockchains. There are public versus private, there's enterprise, that still have a level of control by third parties. And so they're not completely a free-for-all, complete decentralization in the idealist sense. And so I think that still poses some challenges for the people in how they're using it or able to use it.
And with that said, I want to make sure that everyone's on the same playing field. Obviously, with the amount of research that you've done, you're going to be on a higher playing field than most of us, right? But in order to level it off just a little bit, you were mentioning, and we've both already mentioned blockchain, but for everyone out there, let's give them a little bit of just a quick brief of what the blockchain is and how it sort of relates to crypto, what we're talking about.
Yeah, thanks for that. It's always good to bring it back. So I'm sure a lot of the folks listening, you've heard of Bitcoin. Bitcoin was the first and most common cryptocurrency. And the way it came about was there was a Bitcoin white paper that was published back in 2008 by Satoshi Nakamoto. It's an alias used. We don't know who he, she, it group of individuals is or are. But they laid out this new technology called distributed ledger technology, which we now know as blockchain. So essentially, the infrastructure or the protocol or the fundamental technology that is used to transact and to interact is called the blockchain. That's the foundational layer. The blockchain is a digital ledger, just like your bank keeps a digital ledger of all your transactions going in and out. The blockchain is a digital ledger that verifies all of these transactions going in and out. But instead of traditional methods, it uses cryptographic code to verify that Alla sent Jerome $5. Jerome received it at such and such time, and then it was hard-coded and secured. And now it's verifiable, it's transparent, and it's hard-coded on this technology called the blockchain.
Right.
And essentially you have a block. So in Bitcoin, it's a 10-minute block, which captures those transactions during that time period. And then it'll go to the next block and the next block and next block and so on until you get a blockchain with all of those historic transactions recorded, linked together. And they rely on the previous transactions hash, or essentially the code and the verification, to confirm that we can go on to the next block. So you can historically look back and verify that all the transactions in the past have taken place. And you can actually see this online. Rather than using a person's name, you get a string of letters and numbers that identify you. Right. So it's still, in essence, you can see who took part in these transactions. And then the big thing about why this is revolutionary, why this is a big deal, and why it's being broadly applied to industries like real estate is a couple of things. One, it is decentralized. So there's no single party or entity or government that controls it. Again, to my previous comment, there are some caveats. There's some, exceptions to that, but essentially that is true. It is immutable. So that means that it can't be changed once something is set, it's locked in. And it is also secure because of its distributed capability. Essentially, it's distributed amongst many computers around the world. So there's no single point of failure. There's no, again, single authority. And so all those transactions there's checks and balances in place to make sure that they are happening correctly.
And the checks and balances are basically the people with all these computers or the large organizations that are mining, right?
Correct.
Okay.
Yep. And so now, what's the big deal of that? The big deal is now you have, money can be sent as quickly as an email around the world. It can also be programmable with something called a smart contract. You can avoid the tediousness of having to wait for banks to open or, business hours, especially if you're interacting around the world.
Yeah.
So now it's a little bit more simplified, cheaper, faster, easier to send money anywhere around the world. And it is also, because of its secure nature, you have less room for error, you have more verifiability of data, and you can accurately, with confidence, say that this took place and it is true. So, we've seen, especially in real estate, there's mistakes are made, there is fraud, transactions are lengthy and sometimes a bit archaic. You're essentially simplifying the process overall.
So generally speaking, when when you move into how this ties into real estate, I mean, right there, what you were talking about is really the title process, no? Title
Yeah.
search, right?
Certainly the title process, and that, bleeds into many other things, deeds, title transfers for sure, any document transfer, even something like, ILCs or surveys,
Yeah.
trying to identify public records from the county clerk. And then it also affects things like mortgage lending or escrow or investing. I mean, it touches on so many aspects of the industry, but going back to smart contracts specifically, yes, probably title and anything pertaining to document transfer involving multiple parties or multiple agencies is where it has the biggest effect.
So can we break that down just a little bit? I mean, maybe an example, or maybe just kind of broadly brush over, like, let's take a deed, for instance. How is the blockchain gonna make that searchable process faster or easier? What would be the point of putting in blockchain into this process in the first place?
Yeah, so I think, currently there's so many parties that interact in a single real estate transaction.
Yeah.
And if everything is put on a blockchain, which currently we're far away from that, we're still very early days in this tech. So this isn't something that's happening today, but it definitely has the capacity to move quickly. If we put transactions on the blockchain, any party, whether it's the buyer, seller, lender, title, escrow, the inspectors, anybody in the transaction can go in there and view the history of the property, all of the information associated with that property, and verify that it is correct and accurate, and you can proceed to the next step. Currently, I think there's over 800 MLSs nationwide. I mean, Colorado has like 14. To me, that doesn't make a whole lot of sense. If you need information across county lines or, different regional geographic areas, yet you're a realtor in Colorado, you don't necessarily even have access to all the information that you need. Documents may not have been recorded properly prior to a certain year just because their record keeping was different.
Exactly.
I mean, you have to jump through all sorts of hoops to identify the correct information. And then we have things like title insurance. I mean, you might have liens that don't come up that you'll discover years later, and you need that insurance to protect you. I mean, it's not very practical the way that things are set up now. Whereas if you have it on a blockchain and everyone can access the same information, you're eliminating so much room for error. You're simplifying it. You're eliminating the need to go to 10 different individuals to identify the answer to one single question. It just makes sense to have a more standardized location and process for data verification and to move forward in the transaction process.
So what this really reminds me of, everything you're saying right now. I spent 20 years in the military, right? And when I first came in, it was basically right after 9/11. Even then, higher ups in the military was talking about, we're going to move into a digital army, a digital military, right? And what that basically meant was everything was supposed to be digitized, especially it was going to be, our medical records and all our admin data and stuff like that. And it is still going on. It's still taking forever, and that's what this reminds me of, is if we are to move on this path where, everything's put on the blockchain, it seems like it'll be a massive effort to get that done.
Probably. I do think things like that, unfortunately, do have to come from the top down. Right now, we're seeing it on a localized level, whether it's individual realtors getting on board or state mandates for certain things. Yeah, I mean, going back to the question about El Salvador and having the two currencies running in parallel, I mean, essentially, I think we'll see that in something like the real estate market for a while, where we'll still have traditional records. I mean, you think of any office requirement or SEC requirement, you need to have paper records for 5 years.
Yeah.
You can also have digital copies. It will probably be a slow transition, but I will say this, that, it took about 25 years for the internet to get to the point where it is today, where it's almost universal, where many, if not most people, are using the internet for their everyday needs. It's not going to take 25 years for this technology. The adoption rate is significantly faster than what we saw for the internet age. The network effects are much greater. There's much quicker adoption. And so hopefully the goal is that we'll be able to transition to using this technology more universally, much quicker than we did with the internet.
Okay. So, I mean, we're being optimists, we're talking about this.
There's no other way to be.
Yeah, right. As if it has to happen. At some point it'll happen, and hopefully it happens sooner than we're all thinking. Right now, as far as you and I, realtors, okay, how do we get ready for this? Like, if it's gonna happen, let's say, next 5 years, 5 to 10, right? And it starts happening, we can see it. How do we prepare for what's to come? I mean, that's a monumental change, right? And I mean, not just realtors. You mean realtors, clients, buyers, sellers, landlords, like,
sure.
How do we get ready?
Yeah. Well, I think, as realtors, our job is to adapt and to adjust to changing markets and changing needs. No transaction is alike. No client is alike. So we're already used to kind of, moving quickly as things change. I think the job of a realtor is to always stay ahead of the curve and informed, and not just on aspects like your local real estate market or your, sphere of influence. It's also staying on top of big technology moves that might affect your industry, and how to leverage those to help your clients. I mean, what we're seeing now is a lot of folks, particularly millennials, who have found themselves to have new crypto wealth. They might not be wealthy in the traditional sense of owning fiat, but they certainly have, upwards to millions in crypto wealth, and they want to leverage that to buy property. They want to use that to invest in real estate. How do we as realtors help them do that? Well, it's our job to figure out what's possible, what tools are available, how do they do that? And, we've seen this already happen, like, Instagram reels and TikTok videos. I see all realtors on those platforms now, where you wouldn't have guessed 5 years ago that, some of the individuals using it would be so embracing of that tech. And it's fantastic. I think it's great, and that is the potential of tech innovation. It permeates every aspect of life, and you can get on board or you can get left behind. And I think that's what we'll see with blockchain in real estate specifically.
Okay. Yeah, I see where you're going with that. And, I before I became a realtor, I was not active on all this social media either. So I'm one of those that kind of started jumping on board. I tell you what I will not be doing though. Even though I'm on TikTok, you're not going to catch me dancing around on TikTok.
Oh, too bad.
It's not going to happen.
Well,
Okay,
there's still
so
time. There's still hope.
cool. Well,
Well, and
I'm
I,
gonna put a 0% on that.
and it's not just social media. I mean, I see more and more realtors posting their new listings with 360 virtual imagery using drones. That's adopting new tech. I mean, it doesn't have to be very complicated, and you don't necessarily need to understand the back end, how it works.
Yeah.
You just know that it simplifies your life and your job and that of your clients. And so you're more willing to use it. And hopefully that's what we see with blockchain technology. We don't need to understand every detail of the back end, but certainly if we see new platforms come on board that make that process simpler and better, why not use it?
Yeah. And on that note, right? So you just mentioned the 360 panoramas that we're using. We're using the walkthroughs that are, basically virtual reality. I've actually seen one of those as well, right? If we take this deeper, much deeper than we probably should, right? And we start talking about crypto and blockchain also adding to this, there's this thing out there, everybody's talking about the metaverse, right? In my head, years from now, I feel like there's a possibility where you could have digital representations of real property on the metaverse, right? And people are requesting access to walk through the property from, I don't know, an actual realtor, or maybe not, and they're taking a look at the property. We've already had quite a bit of buying and selling sight unseen, right? So this is not that far out, in my opinion, right? If you're seeing it, a digital representation of it in, the metaverse, and then you make your transaction that way, is there a possibility you think that could happen in the future? I mean, what are we looking like here?
Oh boy. Well, we're optimists, right? So I think
Yeah,
anything is
yeah.
possible. Um,
Yeah.
I think we are seeing that. So a couple of things. Currently, there is what you've described. So there's the virtual augmented reality representation of a physical place. You can, for example, create your own home replica in the metaverse
Right.
and have that as an experience, as a property to buy and sell. And it's just a virtual representation of that. So it's sold and transacted similar to like an art NFT is.
Yep. Gotcha.
Um, you essentially just purchase the likeness of the real asset. And then there's, going a step further, there's the imagined worlds that people are creating that have no physical representation in the real world, but you can create a whole universe and create property within that scope. So, I mean, to me, this is like mind-blowing stuff, right? I can't
Yeah, it
really
is.
wrap my head around it, but it sounds amazing. I'll tell you that there's already millions of dollars being transacted in the metaverse on real estate specifically. I think there was a study done earlier this year, and they estimated it was about 500 million was spent on real estate in the metaverse, and it's
Wow.
slated to
Yep.
double this year. And then you have, brands like Sandbox. I don't know if you're familiar with them. So they have, big stars, famous people who are creating their own properties in the metaverse.
Yeah,
Snoop
Snoop
Dogg,
Dogg has one. Yeah.
yep, Snoop Dogg, Paris Hilton just
Yep.
created her Malibu mansion. So you can have a piece of these properties in there. It's more of selling a brand and experience, I think, at this point. Than, to me, it is similar to traditional real estate transactions. You don't need to have a realtor license to transact there. There's really not many qualifications or standards in it. And so, you don't have to ask me, ask someone who's frequented the metaverse way more frequently. But anything can happen. And I think all of these things will evolve pretty quickly. I'm sure, I know that the US government specifically is trying to create better standards and practices and policies around anything pertaining to cryptocurrency and digital assets. Biden had passed a bill earlier this year that had almost every agency involved in creating, research and standards within the space. And so I think it will probably, cover the metaverse as well at some point. But to me, they're almost two very distinct things, just because there really is no process. I mean, you can buy a piece of property for $20 in the metaverse and it'll take 10 seconds to transact. There's no formal process to that.
Yeah, it's just, it's one of those pipe dreams, right? For me anyway. I would love to see this happen in my lifetime. Just see it all get fused and then, go from there. Man, that'd be something. I definitely appreciate your time here that you've spent. You've actually opened up my eyes to a couple of things that I didn't know before. I want to give the floor to you again, though. Maybe either a wrap up or throw something out there that you think the audience should take away from this entire talk. If there's only one or two things, what should they really take away? Whether, be it as realtors or buyers, sellers, anyone in the real estate industry.
Yeah. Well, thanks for that. I think we live in a very dynamic world and a dynamic industry that changes very, very quickly. We've seen that right now. Everything was going through the roof, and then almost overnight there was a market shift. Things happen quickly, and they happen even quicker with new tech. So I think the biggest takeaway is that I would just encourage anyone who's even remotely interested in the topic to read, learn, watch, listen as much as you possibly can. Just sponge it all up, because it will happen much quicker than we anticipate. And there's endless opportunities to do that online. There's podcasts, YouTube videos, free courses that you can take. And specifically as realtors, there are now coming more and more real estate specific crypto courses. We mentioned in the beginning, I teach one through Cox Education. There are a couple of cool Instagram accounts and podcasts that I would throw out there. One is called Crypto Times Real Estate Podcast. There's the Breakdown. There's the Delphi podcast, Unchained. These are not necessarily real estate specific, but they will help you understand this space a lot clearer. And the more you listen, the more, some of the jargon repeats itself and you become familiar with it really quickly. Right. And so, learn as much as you can, pay attention. Even folks like Tom Ferry, I don't know if you're familiar with Tom Ferry. He's a big real estate coach and marketing expert. He's been showcasing and inviting a lot of crypto and real estate experts. So we're seeing this pop up more and more and more. This isn't some esoteric thing that we're talking about anymore. It's very much happening around us. So strongly encourage everyone to pay attention and learn as much as you can.
Okay, awesome. And then, last thing, somebody out there has got all this Bitcoin. Now they want to buy a house out there in Crested Butte. How do they get a hold of you?
Call me. You can find me at Alla, ALLA, at signaturepropertiescb.com. I'm also on Facebook and Instagram, Alla Rubinstein Real Estate. And I look forward to connecting with anyone and everyone who just wants to chat, grab a coffee. Let me know if you're in this part of Colorado.
Awesome. Definitely appreciate it. And like always, anyone that wants to learn a little bit more, please check the description. Reach out to Alla, especially if you have blockchain questions. And if you appreciate these types of videos and tidbits that I put out on a weekly basis, give me a like, give me a subscribe.